allow people who are on the wrong side to become the victims of those who know their actions will be supported by the paramilitaries or otherwise, that are reflecting, however imperfectly or otherwise, the will of the leaders. You cannot operate paramilitaries in somebody else's territory, even in your own maybe, certainly not in somebody else's, without having crossed the line well and truly. Just remember what I said at the beginning. Our society totters on the support that it is given by the legitimate monopoly of violence, which is the state's police and the army. And once you disturb that in the way that the Red Berets did and other paramilitary groups, then you expose people to exactly the risks that happened here. So this was a wonderful piece of evidence. Milosevic recognized it as probably the best, and he knew, probably better than my fellow lawyers knew, why it was so overwhelmingly good. Because it didn't just show the mechanics of his being able to control a paramilitary group, it showed that in his mind he was prepared to take that next step, to act outside the law, to achieve the objectives that might themselves not have been unlawful. And of course, in Milosevic's case, it's possible to see what may well be not unknown to other political leaders, namely that the process of being in political leadership can have a corrupting effect on you. And we know that at the end of his time, in 2000, Milosevic, the once banker and lawyer, when faced with political opposition from his one-time mentor, Ivan Stambolic, by then had become a common criminal and had his political opponent killed in cold blood. Whether that's because he was always like that and was a monster, whether he was coarsened by events, who knows, and does it matter? What's important in this trial, or was important in this trial, as in all such trials, is to be fair to the human concerned, because he is a human being. Not to assert criminality or wickedness until it can be established, and then dispassionately to see how things develop. And of course, things in the particular part of the conflict on which we perhaps should now focus before I bring matters to an end, because I suspect we'll soon want to have had enough and ask questions. Things developed in relation to Srebrenica in particular, in a way that might have been revealed by those documents that were blacked out, or at least revealed in part, but that were otherwise difficult to attach to Milosevic, namely the killings in Srebrenica itself. And some of you will recall, I suspect, a very disturbing bit of film involving another paramilitary group called the Scorpions. Anybody remember seeing this on the television? What happened in the trial was quite interesting because, first of all, I played a small part of it, and then in cross-examination of a witness, and then the full version was played in Belgrade, and it's thought the playing of the full version led to something of a sea-changing attitude of Serbs to what had happened at Srebrenica. But what this clip of film showed was Scorpions. Here you see them at the beginning of their mission, taking their hats off so they could all be identified. From a lawyer's point of view, absolutely extraordinary. Every member of the group a pretty well full face-to-camera picture as they're blessed by the priest. The best identification evidence a lawyer could ask for. And then this awful business, a long way away from Srebrenica, south of Sarajevo, with young boys being got out of the van. They were very young, 6 of them, and then shot. Now, This, of course, was critical because that group was shown to be responsible to this man, the police general who was in charge of them, who was giving evidence, and indeed whom I asked questions about it, Slobodan. And ultimately, it would have been proved, if Milosevic hadn't died, that the group was answerable to him, and he was a Serb police general. So that the killings at Srebrenica could now be connected not just to the Bosnian Serbs, but to the Serbs of Serbia. So, an incredibly important piece of evidence. But, and here's another somewhat disturbing fact. Perhaps I'll end on this, although I've got a number of other things I would quite like to talk to you about, maybe in questions. Because of those images at the beginning of the film, which showed precisely who was responsible, the Serb authorities themselves had to prosecute those who were shown, and they did. What would you have expected, you the people, if you knew of a unit from a comparatively low level of seniority being involved in the killings at Srebrenica? What would you expect by way of investigation? Would you expect it to stop at the unit commander? Or would you perhaps say, shouldn't we find out who it was who instructed him? Who it was who instructed him or her? Well, two things happened. Each for reason, well, one for reasons that's obvious. The Serbs did not pursue people further up that management chain. For reasons that I can't explain, my efforts to have an investigation going above the people shown on the film was also blocked. There are many questions that one could ask that arise from, let me just race through and I'll see if I can find them. A whole lot of questions that you can ask about that arise from considerations of the nature of war and these, and that get sharpened, the questions get sharpened and not answered by what I've experienced and what you will learn about these tribunals. Does man want really to live in peace? You have to take account of what man actually does. There are optimists, there are skeptics, there are pessimists. I express no view. Do war crimes achieve any reconciliation? Now, I think one of you put that high, I think, when I asked you the question at the beginning. Does retribution serve any purpose? You weren't interested as an audience. You weren't particularly interested in retribution. And in any event, what purpose does? If the crimes are as bad as they are, killing hundreds, thousands of people, what is the retribution of putting someone in a prison for 5, 10, 15 years? There's no matching of retribution to wickedness, if it is wickedness. Perhaps a more interesting question, because it's one that I can be very positive about. Is it valuable to have ever better records of how humans commit the gravest of crimes against their fellow humans, and if so, why? I believe that what these trials leave behind in the record that they create is invaluable, both for showing how it is that people do what they do, and also the point that was made by one of your number, for stopping people rewriting history and using it to create later mythologies that can be instrumentalized to wicked purpose. Should the individual combatant be held personally accountable when most humans, and this is a a reality we have to face. Most, many, whatever you like, humans will or may behave in a similar way under similar circumstances. Is it fair to be selective, as inevitably we are, about which particular crimes within a conflict are brought to book? Remember what I said about the way that Bob Stewart led to the selection of Amici, or about how the world is likely to select Darfur, but to exclude Burma. Does it matter if we're unfair? You could easily argue, well, it is unfair in the most basic sense, but you've got to start somewhere. And if there is ever to be a world order in which there is some evenness of response, unless you're prepared to start where there is unevenness, you'll never get anywhere. Finally, on this page, and I won't go to the last one, should lawyers or politicians be the decision makers of whether to try particular war crimes? Number of questions? Let's see if you've got any for me. Thank you. Any questions for anybody? Yes. Microphone, you want the microphone?
You just posed the question of whether these trials contribute to reconciliation in any way, but I'm interested in your opinion, since you have experience with, I'm sure, with the publicity and everything. Do you think, especially, I'm from Bosnia, so I'm interested in that area, do you think that the trials have contributed positively or negatively to the process of reconciliation and peace building? Or do you maybe think that it's contributed differently at different times after a conflict?
Well, first of all, I suspect you will know, I genuinely believe you must know more than I will, because it's your country, your culture, and there's, in a way, a great impertinence in outsiders having anything to do with other people's conflicts, which they try through the medium of interpretation without understanding the culture, the language, the history, and so on. So I suspect you will and should know a great deal more than I do. But there is, I think, little evidence at present that these trials, as they've been conducted, have brought true reconciliation. I'm not saying that they haven't worked. There is evidence, however, that they've achieved collateral purposes, which are kind,